When it comes to quilting, do you not just love that little phrase that pattern designers sneak in there right at the end, quilt as desired? When I see that, my brain thinks, time to clean the oven. Now, in my personal opinion, I think the #1 reason why we have this response to quilt as desired is because we just don't know how to quilt our quilts. Not knowing what will work with your quilt layout and maybe not knowing what the finished quilt will look like can all leave you abandoning that project. And then 5 years later, we find it stuffed in the back of a cupboard and wonder, why is it there? I've already talked a little bit about the psychology of why this happens, how to recognize the signs, and then how to work through them and make a plan to get over it. So I'll leave a link in the description below so you can catch up with that. But to help solve this problem, or at least one of the problems that I've mentioned, I've created this video series called This Is How You Quilt It. And it's ideas for how to make quilt as desired a little bit easier. In it, we're going to be making 21 all-over quilting designs that are fast and easy and will look great on the majority of quilts. But here's a difference in this series. Rather than just showing you how to draw lines and how to sew it, which doesn't necessarily solve the problem of what is it going to look like on your finished design. Instead, what we're going to be doing is we are going to be looking at example quilts, so we can get a real feel for what's possible using these designs. So for every design in this series, I'll be looking at least 2 example quilts. And these are digital mock-ups, so they are approximations of what it could look like, but it starts to help you visualize so that you can see what a project might look like when it's finished. And it starts to take away some of the fear of not knowing what your finished projects will look like. And at the end of this series, we are going to be binding all these samples and then making a flip book out of them. So when the time comes to quote your project, you can get your book out, flip through it, and pick your design and get to sewing. Throughout the series, the designs do increase in complexity, but I do believe that they are achievable for any level of sewing experience. You just need to do a bit of planning, a bit of prep, and then follow the step-by-step instructions to sew this. Now also, I have given each design a complexity rating from 1 to 5, where 1 is dead simple and easy and 5 is fairly complex. And also, I have given each design a cuttable rating. Now this is important, because if you were making a baby quilt, you want a really soft, fluffy, light quilt. But if you're making a wall hanging, you might want something that's a little denser and that hangs a little bit straighter. So the cuttable rating will help you to decide this. On the scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is soft and fluffy with less quilting, and 5 is dense and stiff with more quilting. And you can use these as a guide to apply them to your projects. I'm also beyond excited to tell you that there will be an accompanying book to this video series, and that will be available to buy later on this year. In the book is going to be all of these designs with step-by-step instructions and illustrations, and example quilts to show you how the designs can look. And then I'm also going to be adding 9 more additional designs that will not be shown in these videos for your projects. And it will be packed full of information about quilting and how to get the best out of the quilting process, how to set your sewing machine and everything up for success, and how to make the quilting process a little less stressful. So that's going to be a great resource for you to have in your studio. So make sure you use the link below to sign up to my mailing list so you'll get notified when that becomes available for pre-orders. Now let's get organized for this video series. In the description below, you will find a link to a free workbook, and that has all the supplies and fabric requirements for this series, and you can download that for free. But here's what you're going to need for the project. For fabric, you will need 3 1/4 yards of 42-inch wide or wider fabric, or you will need 42 layer cake squares. Layer cakes usually come with 42 squares in it, but just be sure to check the pack size just in case it's only a half layer cake. You will need 1 yard of 92-inch or wider batting, or you can get a pre-cut twin size 72 by 90 inches. For the batting that I am using 100% cotton autumn weight batting, which is my normal batting of choice. It's nice and thick, and it will give me nice, well-defined stitches. I would highly recommend using the batting that you normally use in your projects because you will be aware of how it handles and how it works. If once you've made these, you would like to go back and make them in other samples, that can be a great way of seeing how different batting responds to the different quilting designs. And getting a sampler pack or scraps from friends can be a great way to get some different types of batting that you don't normally use. You will need something to baste your sandwiches, so pins or spray base, whichever you prefer. You will need thread for this. I am using a 50 weight thread. You will need a basic quilting ruler larger than 10 inches. You will need some method to mark your fabric, be it chalk, fabric pencil, or fabric pen. Any type of pen, pencil, chalk, any kind of fabric marker will work for this. Just be sure that it does come off when you have finished with it. Now, a walking foot is helpful for this because I find that it feeds the top and bottom layers nice and evenly and avoids any issues with puckering. And it also helps my stitches to form evenly because the quilt is not dragging too slow or pushing too fast through it. It's not essential for these little 10-inch squares. You can sew these with a normal foot, or if you have a dual feed function on your sewing machine, you can also use that as well. But when the time comes for sewing full-size quilts, you will want to have a walking foot. Quilting gloves, again, are useful but not necessary for these small squares, but I I do like them because they do give me a little bit more traction when I'm moving the squares about. For the binding, you're also going to need to cut 20 width of fabric strips. I'm using 2¼ inch wide strips because I want a little thin binding on just this small square, but please do use the binding width that you prefer. This is a great opportunity to practice your binding skills. Sewing 21 little 10-inch squares is a lot harder than you think, so it's a great opportunity to practice those skills and really refine your binding technique. And to make the sample book, you are going to need eyelets, or I believe they are called grommets in the US, and then some kind of ring to put them on. And if you can get a ring that opens so that you can easily add further designs to this, that will make it really easy to add future designs in as you add to your collection. Now, when it comes to picking a fabric color for this project, you probably want to stick to a solid color here. And that will help because there's no patterns on the fabric which can potentially conflict with the marking. Now, that's not a problem when you're doing actual quilts, but because we're just learning how to sew these designs, having a solid plain background will make it easier to understand these designs as you sew them. And also pick a thread that heavily contrasts with that so that the designs are obvious when you're looking at them. I've used navy fabric here, so I have picked white now. You can probably see that contrast from space, but it looks good on the camera and it sticks out nicely for me. So when I'm looking at these designs, I can see where the thread goes and I can understand how they work. If I was to use the navy thread on these, I would just see the texture in the quilt. And that might be a little bit harder when you're just learning to sew these for the first time. So I would definitely recommend contrasting thread. Using a 50 weight thread here, and I have a universal 80/12 needle. The reason I've picked a 50 weight thread is that I like this and how it looks on these samples. There is a nice balance between the stitches disappearing into the sample and showing up on the surface. But you can use any weight of thread that you like. You may just have to adjust your stitch length to accommodate the thickness of your thread. When it comes to stitch, I'm using just a regular straight stitch on my sewing machine, and my length is set to 2.75. Now for designs 14 and 16 in this series, we are actually going to use a decorative stitch, a waves or serpentine stitch as it's sometimes called. I have a Benina 770 QE, and on the sewing machine this is stitch number 1319. I have the width set to 5.5 and I have the length set to 35.2. If you use a straight stitch plate, be sure to change to a regular plate so that you do not break your quilting needle. Now there's minimal prep work to do for this video series, and in fact if you've got yourself a layer cake, then you're already halfway done with your prep. However, I am using yardage. So first of all, I need to cut myself 10-inch strips. Now I am double folding this fabric because this is 60 inches wide, so I need to double fold it to fit on my table. If you are using a normal 42-inch wide fabric, you will need to cut 11 10-inch strips. Then we want to cut the selvages off these, and then you're going to subcut all of these strips into 44 10-inch squares. We only need 42, so you can take 2 of those and put them neatly away for another day. Now when it comes to the batting, I am using off the roll batting, and I have a scrap here that I just want to show you how this works. Very similar to cutting up fabric, I am just giving myself a straight edge. I have this folded up, it's too wide for my cutting mat. And then I give myself a straight edge on one side, flip it round, and then line up the 10-inch line on my ruler and then cut the other side. And then cut it into 10-inch squares. You'll also notice that I flipped my cutting mat over to the back side that I don't normally use. I don't want to get the front covered in fluff. I'd also suggest using an old rotary cutter blade to save your sharp edges dulling on the batting. Now we need to make 21 quilt sandwiches using 2 squares of fabric and 1 square of batting. Base these however you like, whether you use pins, safety pins, or spray base. I prefer to use spray base because it's quicker. Just be mindful if you're using pins or safety pins that when you're drawing lines and you're sewing, you may have to reposition the pins. But you may find that you don't actually need to base these. These samples are pretty small, and depending on the batting that you use, it may hold everything together without too many problems. A pro tip, if you are spray basting, get yourself a sheet of newspaper or some old paper and pop it down on your surface, and then do your spray basting on this, because this will avoid getting glue all over your table or floors. And if you happen to be watching anything on an iPad or an iPhone while doing this, just position it a little further back, because it did take me 10 minutes last night to scrape all the spray glue off of my iPad. I do like to take some of the scraps of the fabric and batting and make myself a little sampler that I can use to test my stitches. I'm looking for how the sandwich behaves in the sewing machine, and this allows me to try out different lengths of stitch, and it can show me any tension issues or any problem with my sewing machine so I can fix it before I start sewing. And you can see I tried quite a few different stitches, and then then eventually decide on 2.75. It's also an opportunity to check your decorative stitches and see how they work and how they behave if you've never used them before. And be sure to write these down and take a note of them, because as you come back to your sewing machine, you will need to set it up regularly so these samples all have consistent looking stitches. So take a note and keep it somewhere safe. And also make sure you wind yourself a couple of bobbins in advance. You'll know from your sewing machine how long a bobbin lasts. In my case, I'll probably only need 2 bobbins because my Bernina has jumbo bobbins, so they last for quite a while. But just make sure to wind them in advance, because there's nothing worse than getting halfway through a line of stitching and then having to stop and wind the bobbin. And then once you've got everything prepared and you are ready to go, get yourself a project box or a bag so that you can place everything that you need in it and keep it all safe. And then every time the video comes out, you can pull out a sandwich and all the supplies that you need, and you can get straight to sewing. Now we're all organized and we are ready to sew. So the first design in this series, which is straight lines, it comes out on March 21st, and then every 2 weeks after that there will be a new video with a new design for you. Follow along with my progress on Instagram on the hashtag "This is how you quilt it," and if you're sharing your samples, please tag me at the Colorblind Quilter so that I can follow along with all your progress. Remember, in the description below is the free worksheet that has all the supplies and all the prep work that you need to do for this. And if you want to get on the mailing list for pre-ordering the accompanying book, then you can do that in the description below as well. If you like this video, please do consider giving it a thumbs up. Make sure that you are subscribed and you have clicked that bell so you'll get notified when design number 1 is released. So until next time, take care.